No one can really tell you that the food supply is safe.
I didn't feed her something off the street.
Tonight on 48 Hours.
I don't eat chicken anymore.
They are carcinogenic.
Food and your family.
Has she had any ground beef?
Is what's on your plate
I said yes.
a recipe for illness
She was crying tremendously with stomach cramps.
or even death?
How could food have killed her?
Cheeseburger, medium rare.
Cheeseburger, well done! This is how you find out what they're using.
Pesticides
Looks like it's all diethane.
from the fields of Costa Rica.
This area is filled with insecticides and fungicides.
To your market. We shop
Okay, what kind of whole chickens do you carry?
and test what you buy
So which kind of chicken was best?
and discover some ingredients
You're looking for purple colonies.
you won't find in a cookbook.
We're obsessive when it comes to fresh seafood products.
A 48 hours investigation. Is your food safe? A year ago, the nation was stunned when hundreds of children in Washington state became sick after eating hamburgers at a fast food restaurant. Within weeks, 3 children died. Countless Americans became alarmed, and troubling questions were raised about the safety of our food supply. The truth is, bad food could be on any table, and the government estimates that each year, 30 million of us are getting sick from what we eat. Tonight, you will find out why and what you can do about it. And we'll take you on a shopping trip that doesn't end at the checkout counter, but in the laboratory, where we test the food you buy. As you will see, in this land of plenty, there is plenty in our food to give us food for thought.
Joy.
How could food have killed her? How could food have killed her? We weren't in a foreign country. I didn't feed her something off the street.
Lori and Bob Galler live in Long Island, New York with their younger daughter, Christy.
There you go. You give mommy a hug and kiss.
Their older daughter, Lois Joy, died a year and a half ago. The Gallers are convinced they gave their child the meat that killed her.
I do believe it came from the ground beef when I had prepared the meatballs. It's either that or fast food. She had had a fast food burger just a day prior to having the ground beef that I had prepared at home.
The disease that killed Lois Joy is rare, hemolytic uremic syndrome, or HUS. By comparison, this microscopic bacteria that causes it, E. coli 0157, is not so rare, and when it's found in cows, it can end up in ground beef and the food of children like Lois Joy.
I thought she had a 24-hour virus.
It started off with a slight fever and a trip to the doctor in the hospital.
She became very lethargic, very pale. She was crying tremendously with stomach cramps and bloody diarrhea. I literally carried her into our pediatrician, who at that point took one look at her and said, get her back to the hospital. There's something here.
And we're admitting her this time.
Right.
After tests, a doctor arrived at their hospital room.
And he says, we have reason to believe your daughter has a very rare kidney disease. She has the hemolytic uremic syndrome.
And the first question he asked was,
Has she had any ground beef?
Has she had any ground beef? And I said yes.
That was the first time the Gallers realized their daughter had food poisoning, that E. coli bacteria had caused the kidney disease.
And then we were told basically that this disease has no treatment.
One by one, every organ is destroyed.
My daughter had 16 dialysis treatments, and she had 14 blood transfusions.
Less than 3 weeks after she had eaten the ground beef, Lois Joy died.
Only another parent who has suffered the loss of a child can truly understand the pain.
But just 6 months later, other parents, thousands of miles away, got some idea of how dangerous the bacteria can be.
Health officials in Seattle confirmed today that contaminated fast food killed one child and made many other children ill.
Last year, when hundreds of children became ill in Seattle, That's when the rest of the country began to learn about E. coli.
This is indeed a very severe toxigenic outbreak we're having.
The deadly bacteria was quickly traced to a shipment of hamburger patties delivered to Jack in the Box restaurants in the Pacific Northwest. The hamburgers were not being cooked enough to kill the E. coli bacteria.
We have never had a problem, anything at all like this one.
The final Washington state tally, 477 confirmed cases of E. coli poisoning, with 3 deaths. What was unusual was not just the high number of cases, but the fact that health officials could trace the source. What's far more common is what happened here in Texas. And you probably never even heard about it. So do you remember when you went to the hospital?
It started with diarrhea, and I wasn't too concerned at first.
In May, 4 months after the Seattle outbreak, Luann Hintz watched her son Teddy get sicker and sicker. No one knew what Teddy had.
This is the article that was in there on that day.
Until she happened to read this article about E. coli and beef. What was your reaction?
I was scared to death because I thought, this is what he has. Because I knew we had eaten a hamburger out at fast food. I took him in the next morning and I had to carry him because he was stuporous, he couldn't walk.
The doctor examined Teddy in the hospital.
He said, your suspicion of hemolytic uremic syndrome is correct.
Teddy survived, but he may suffer permanent kidney damage. He got sick, even though at the time the Texas Department of Health was screening meat throughout the state, specifically looking for E. coli bacteria. They didn't find any.
Was this even something you thought was a big concern?
We had no evidence that we had much of a problem here in Texas.
Dr. Diane Simpson is the Associate Commissioner for Disease Prevention at the Texas Department of Health. She never heard about Teddy Hintz's case.
We don't go out and look for cases. Cases are reported to us, and cases were not being reported.
But last October, that all changed.
I was calling you about the 3 HUS cases over at Cook Children's.
There's been an additional case.
As reports of HUS cases come in,
Memorial.
Dr. Simpson launches an investigation.
Actually, we've had a couple cases just recently.
The Texas Department of Health is searching for some common cause for a troubling number of cases of food poisoning.
2 young children died in recent weeks, and other children and an elderly man were hospitalized.
This is an HUS.
E. coli poisoning is more severe in children and the elderly.
He is a 3-year-old.
Investigators turn up a total of 10 cases in 10 different counties.
The one thing we do have in common for all the cases is they all eat hamburger.
Investigators visit every place that might have distributed contaminated meat.
What we're doing is going to all the places that they've eaten or their families have bought food from.
Are you in charge?
We're going to need about a pound's worth.
Some questions about a certain dish called the poo-poo platter.
Cows have the E. coli 0157. Some cows do.
That's the beef.
The beef,
that's
right.
Beef. Mm-hmm.
When they're slaughtered, it gets into the meat. When you make hamburger, you mix all kinds of pieces of meat together. So the opportunity for the bacteria to just get mixed in and mixed in and mixed in increases when you make hamburger.
I have a hamburger sample to drop off.
It's that mixing that makes it so difficult to trace ground beef back to its source, the suppliers of the stores and restaurants.
In one instance, there was as many as 7 different suppliers that could have distributed meat that wound up in hamburger.
We can't get back to the cows.
That's correct.
The investigators don't find E. coli contamination in any of the samples. And the 10 cases in Texas, unlike those in the Northwest, cannot be linked to a single source.
It was probably 1 cow here, 1 cow there, 1 cow someplace else.
What that says about E. coli 0157 isn't comforting.
It's probably something that's not always there. It just shows up sometimes, but you never know when that sometimes going to be.
So what you're saying, though, is this is a really difficult thing then to prevent.
Actually, it's not difficult to prevent the disease. I mean, all you have to do is cook your meat to prevent the disease.
But to prevent the E. coli from ending up on that meat.
It can be very hard, yes. Maybe impossible.
When we come back, how the meat on your table can become contaminated.
There's feces on the meat. Is that acceptable?
No, that is not acceptable.
But is the government doing enough about it? Next. Terry and Bob Galler are determined to find a cure for the disease that killed their daughter, Lois Joy.
Now, how far do we have to go from here?
The time has come for HUS and E. coli 0157 to get the attention that they deserve, because a lot of children are dying.
The Gallers have set up a foundation in memory of their daughter. Today, they're in Washington, D.C., hoping to enlist the Secretary of Agriculture in their cause. On the other side of the country, Dr. Dale Hancock is also on a mission.
10/15/93 cat. She's got the same birth date as me.
At Washington State University, Hancock isn't trying to find a cure for the disease. He's trying to reduce the bacteria that causes it at its source.
If you find the E. coli in a cow, where is it most likely to be in the body?
In the gastrointestinal tract, particularly in the lower bowel.
The problem is that some cows carry the E. coli and other cows don't. And nobody knows why.
It's kind of like doing a criminal investigation. I mean, first you get your leads, and then you get your suspects, and then you do an investigation on the suspects.
So far, the most likely suspect is the cow's food, but just figuring out which cows are carrying the bacteria is a challenge.
It's really a fishing expedition in a big ocean for a few fish.
Is there any way of just looking at this cow that you'd be able to tell whether he has E. coli 0157?
No.
So looking for sick animals isn't going to help you track down 0157.
That's right. It won't help at all.
And at the slaughterhouse, looking for signs of disease won't help Joe Hubner detect the deadly bacteria either.
Does it look normal?
Oh yeah, normal on color, normal on sides. Beautiful glands.
As a government meat inspector, it's Hubner's job to check for disease and contamination, but he can't check for E. coli.
Is that something you can see?
No, it's bacteria.
Right,
you can't see it.
Can't see it. You can't touch it.
You can't smell it. You can't detect it.
What Hubner can do is watch for obvious contamination on the meat, fecal material from the intestines or the hide.
We don't want any kind of contamination from the hide to get on the carcass.
Just a single hair could harbor millions of E. coli bacteria. At this small, well-run plant in Texas, they carefully process one cow at a time. Hubner has plenty of time to check each animal. It's a different story at a plant like this. Federal beef processors in Rapid City, South Dakota. More than 300 workers process an average of 50 cows every hour. Like every slaughterhouse, there are federal inspectors here too. 4 for the entire plant.
I've seen hair come through on my job, feces. It's just bad all the way around.
This former employee told us contaminated meat routinely gets through.
As far as cleanliness goes, this plant is way on the bottom.
So we sent in a hidden camera to investigate. Not surprisingly, Federal Beef went to court to try to stop us from showing the footage taken inside the plant. The case went as high as it can go. Just today, the United States Supreme Court ruled in our favor. Here's the tape the company didn't want you to see. This is the boning room, the last stop before meat is packed and sent on to consumers.
The main idea is production. Get the meat through.
The worker who shot our video described what he saw. His voice is disguised.
We would see feces.
Fecal material and hair are on the meat, but that wasn't all he saw.
I saw this employee scraping his knife on the ground to get a dull edge off of his blade.
He's taking his boning knife against the floor.
Dr. Lester Freelander is a U.S. Department of Agriculture veterinarian and a critic of the inspection system.
You can see how contaminated the floor is over here. Now he's taking the same boning knife and he's putting it right on the boning table.
How easy is it to spread E. coli contamination in a situation like this?
Well, very easy, because the knife was never even sterilized. It was put direct contamination right back on a boning table.
Here, an abscess has been accidentally cut open.
I saw a chuck, the abscess coming out of that chuck onto the table. It's a green, pussy fluid.
Anytime there is an abscess, the line should be immediately stopped, and the USDA inspector should be called out to the boning area if he's not out there to supervise the cleanup.
They remove the bad piece of meat and trim some others.
They're supposed to wash down the entire table. What actually happened is they just washed up certain areas of the table while the inspector wasn't in.
And now they're removing part of these boning boards, but you have good cuts of meat right here, and he's taking the hose like this, so he's spraying that abscess. It's taking that abscess and shoot it right back on those piles of meat.
Moments later, the line starts up again.
What would you have done?
That meat, I would have instructed the company to throw it away and go for rendering purpose. Meat like that cannot even be used for pet food.
All that meat gets processed, goes down the line and into the consumer's mouth.
We went to the Department of Agriculture and showed our tape to Acting Assistant Secretary Patricia Jensen. She's in charge of the inspection system.
According to the worker, there's feces on the meat and it hasn't been cut off. Is that acceptable?
No, that is not acceptable. We have a zero tolerance in place that says that should not be in existence there.
I mean, obviously, it's in theory and it's not in practice.
Well, you may find that this is one instance.
What would you say if I told you that this specific plant does supply meat to the school lunch program?
Well, as I said, I find this particular segment of the tape to be unacceptable, but this may be an isolated incident.
How common is this? Is this just a bad plant or just a bad day?
I can say from my experience, and I've been in 9 years and talked to other veterinarians and food inspectors throughout the country, this probably goes on a daily basis.
We're also sending in increased numbers inspectors and teams to do unannounced visits, I should tell you.
But would that worry you if you knew that this very plant had an unannounced surprise visit just 2 months before we had this tape taken?
Well, I would say that, again, I hope this is an isolated event, and I'm going to assume that it is, and that we will work with our inspectors.
It's happened before. They've had the big USDA inspectors come in, and we were told, watch it, do things the right way so we don't get rode up. As soon as they were gone, it wasn't a week later, and everything was right back to normal routine.
So what is routine at Federal Beef? Take a look at these documents that we obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. The plant was cited with 603 violations just last year. Almost half of those were considered critical. In other words, pose a direct threat to consumers. That's an unusually high number, according to meat inspectors we talked to, and all 603 violations occurred even after the Department of Agriculture had placed the plant on notice because of previous problems.
Well, we're trying to improve it.
Assistant Secretary Jensen, who did not know the identity of the plant at the time she saw the video, insisted the USDA is doing all it can to protect consumers from E. coli.
But we still have to tell consumers, make sure you cook your product. Don't thaw it on the counter overnight. So the work is going to continue on many different fronts here.
I'm sure that the hazard can be reduced, but you cannot totally eliminate the risk. In the end, you can't produce bacteria-free meat.
It's there, it may be there for a long time, so if that's the case, we need to do something.
As long as there are kids at risk, the Gallers will continue their search for a cure.
I have a personal stake in this.
Their meeting with Agriculture Secretary Michael Espy gives them hope.
If we had, as a government agency, paid attention to this 10 years ago, we'd be much further ahead. In fact, we probably would have been able to find and cure this, E. coli.
It went better than I could have possibly imagined.
Thank you. Espy gives promises of money and support.
I should have asked him. You want to put those in writing? We're pushed by a much greater power than us right now, and that's our little girl. And I think she's helping us make a big difference.
Cheeseburger, medium rare. Cheeseburger, well done. Burger deluxe. Chili burger. Jack burger. Pizza burger.
Can't beat hamburgers.
Right off the grill, it's
delicious. So, with all the attention being given to E. coli poisoning and to food safety in general,
medium rare. Hamburger, medium rare.
is there any real impact on the way people are eating?
People say, the hell with it, let's have a good hamburger. I want beef and I want it hot. I like them on the rare side.
Experts believe as few as 10 E. coli 0157 bacteria can kill a child.
I like it pinkish.
So, for those who still like their burgers rare, the question is, how rare is this bacteria? We wanted to find out. So 48 Hours went shopping in Boston, Atlanta, and San Antonio.
Can I get a pound of ground beef, please?
We bought ground beef in 30 stores and had it tested by an independent laboratory. The scientists simulated digestion and then tested for bacteria.
If you have E. coli, you're looking for purple colonies.
The results? Well, none of our samples had E. coli 0157 bacteria. That's the good news. The bad news is 10 of our samples, 1/3 had listeria and 1 had salmonella. Doctors say either of those bacteria can make you sick if you don't cook your hamburger well enough. And in a very few circumstances, listeria can even be fatal. E. coli 0157 is scarce. Studies show it only turns up in about 3 of every 1,000 cows. But if your rare burger comes from that rare cow,
Take a big sloppy bite.
you could be at risk. So you're thinking, I don't eat beef, I don't have to worry. Well, when we went shopping, we also stopped by the poultry and seafood counters.
Can I get a pound of the salmon fillet?
Those test results and more ahead on 48 Hours.
We have 85 stores in Northern California, Northern Nevada. Produce is a big thing for us. You can see from the store.
Charles Collings is president of Raley's Supermarkets, and like most grocers this time of year, used to going far and wide to get fruits and vegetables to satisfy his picky customers.
Bananas and things of that type are all imported. We fly in pineapple. Growing season in California has ended, so we're bringing in all the vegetables from Mexico.
But a few years ago, Collings started going someplace really odd to satisfy his customers, to a laboratory and a company called NutriClean, run by Stan Rhodes.
Raley's called us in 1987 because the National Academy of Science published a report that said that there were certain types of pesticides in our food that could cause harm to the population.
So Raley's hired NutriClean to screen its produce for pesticides, to catch what the government doesn't.
We find 60 to 65% of all the produce we test has residues. The current system is set not for public safety.
Sandra Marquardt of the environmental group Greenpeace is looking for pesticides too, but much further from home.
Thanks.
Today, on her way to Costa Rica.
You go out looking primarily for what?
We're in the mountains now. I try to look at the entire cycle of how a pesticide that we can't use in the United States is used in other countries.
Please return to your seats and make sure your seatbelt is securely fastened. Señores pasajeros.
Marquardt will gather evidence for testimony before Congress.
So here we are in the middle of a banana plantation field, whatever. What would you look for here that would have anything to do with your mission?
What I would look for here is really just to see how bananas are grown. So they bag they put these insecticide-covered bags on the bananas as they grow to try to keep some of the insects off.
She wants to see for herself if produce headed for the U.S. is being treated with pesticides considered too dangerous for use at home.
This area that we're standing in is filled with insecticides and fungicides. We still have somewhere from 80 to 100 million pounds of these unregistered pesticides coming out of the United States every year.
One way Marquardt tries to document exactly what's being used is to see which pesticides are arriving at the port.
This is the manifest importation.
This is for every boat. We'll have to give you this.
But it isn't easy.
This is what it was on it. So, here we go. Drums of herbicides. Now, they don't say what pesticide it is, what herbicide it is. Does that concern you at all?
No, it doesn't concern us.
That unconcern, she says, is another part of the problem.
This is a spray plane. It's just turning around now. And this guy stands here, and he is called a flagger. His job is to show this spray plane exactly where to go.
What they are spraying is a combination of fungicides, including a German product not allowed in the U.S.
We'll see in just a minute that this plane is going to come around and literally drench him.
Marquardt says farm workers here are frequently unprotected and frequently sick from exposure to high doses of pesticides. As for the little doses, residues left on food, there's also cause for concern.
We know that a lot of the pesticides coming in on imported food are known to cause cancer and reproductive effects in animals. Many of them are presumed to cause cancer in humans.
Pesticide expert Richard Wiles worked on the 1993 National Research Council report, which warned of unsafe pesticide levels in America's food.
High DDT residues.
Unsafe especially for kids.
Why aren't we sick?
Well, cancer rates are rising. Is it a direct cause and effect link? No. Is there a direct cause and effect link between smoking and cancer? No. But there's a very clear association.
Back in rainy Costa Rica,
oh, this is the crop dusting airport.
Sandra Marquardt thinks she has found something.
This is the place that the planes take off from, that spray the entire area. This is how you find out what they're using, because they're sure as hell not going to tell you.
But what she's found is allowed in the U.S. as well.
This is called diethane.
As for the pesticides that aren't,
looks like it's all diethane.
Marquardt is having trouble tracking them down.
Once they leave our borders, no one cares where they go, what happens to them, what they're used on.
Regardless of what pesticide Sandra Marquardt finds, most people just assume that when a shipment of imported food finally does get to the U.S., any trace of dangerous or illegal pesticide would be immediately detected. Environmentalists say, don't bet on it. Nogales, Arizona, one of the Food and Drug Administration's, the FDA's, many checkpoints. Hundreds of trucks pass through here each day.
Every conveyance that you see at this facility arrives today and it leaves today.
Customs checks for drugs, agriculture checks for insects. The FDA checks for pesticides.
No, I don't think they're in.
Well, not today.
The FDA office in Nogales, Arizona on Wednesday is closed.
The Food and Drug Administration can't be everywhere all the time. And if you want to be a critic, you can take a number because we have plenty of those.
John Jones of the Food and Drug Administration admits the FDA checks only 1% of all imported produce shipments. But he says that's enough.
We find only a 2% violation rate. That means that 98% on average of the food supply is perfectly free of illegal residues. Our program is very effective.
And the food supply is safe.
The risks associated with very low-level pesticides appear to be very, very low.
No one can really tell you that the food supply is safe because half the pesticides that are used to produce food can't be detected. When the pesticide is made in Hungary or Czechoslovakia or China and then imported into the United States on pineapples, those companies are under no obligation to tell the FDA how to find that pesticide. There's no way they're going to find that pesticide.
We are working with foreign governments. We do know what's being used over there. When we find a problem, we don't fool around.
But a recent government report disputes that, saying even when the FDA does find illegal pesticides, shippers often shrug off the penalties and deliver the fruits and vegetables anyway.
I understand that what you're trying to do, but I don't know how you can say it's effective if a third of these shipments get by.
We do indeed need more enforcement authority, and that's precisely why we're asking for it. What we can state is that the overall incidence of illegal pesticide residues is quite low, and that the risk associated with these pesticide residues also appear to be quite low.
But a number of grocers just don't buy it. Stan Rhodes' NutriClean company now screens produce for 9 food sellers nationwide.
When we have tested the same food that the government has tested, we have found 6 times more residues.
This is where the fruit and vegetables are stored.
We have seen products from Eastern Europe, particularly, that had the scariest pesticides I've ever seen in my life.
There we go.
Pesticides that would never be used on food in the Western world.
The cucumbers will be the last item that I will pick up here.
The FDA wouldn't have picked that up?
I don't know if they picked it up. We found it.
NutriClean's weekly pickup from Rayleigh's is just coming in. Has Rayleigh's had a problem?
Rayleigh's and all of our retailers at one time or another have had a residue in there that we've had to tell them to take it either off the store shelf or to take it out of the warehouse.
Had you not tested this stuff, nobody would have ever known and this would have gone out.
That's exactly true.
Sandra Marquardt, meanwhile, is wrapping up her trip, making undercover visits to local stores, where she finds small containers of 2 American-made pesticides not approved for use in the U.S.
Is that registered in the U.S.? No, this is made for export only.
Turned down because they were too dangerous.
Yeah, they make this.
Marquardt says this poses both a health and a moral dilemma.
Why do we allow the export of a product that we wouldn't even allow on our own people?
Especially ironic if those pesticides eventually come home again.
We're buying our food as Americans outside the United States more and more. As you do that, as a consumer, you better be prepared to take more risks because you're going to have less control over it.
You got flounders over here, you got redfish, gray sole, stiff as a board. That's the rigor. This fish now is actually too fresh to sell.
Steve Berkowitz will sell no fish before it's time.
If we cooked it up now, it would chew up like rubber in your mouth. We have to let it sit in ice and let the rigor actually set out of it.
But he's even more careful about selling a fish after it's time.
If it's exposed to poor temperatures, it breaks down right away.
That's the stuff you gotta buy. That's it right there.
What's happening now is we're taking the top of the catch coming off. You have boats that can go out for 7 to 10 days at a time. With us, we want just the last 1 or 2 days catch. We're very picky.
Berkowitz runs the family chain of restaurants and fish markets in Boston called Legal Seafoods.
The real key to fresh fish is how well it's been handled. Fish has to be handled in virtually a sterile environment. It's not as hardy as beef. Fish is very perishable.
Berkowitz inspects and tests all of the seafood he sells.
Obsessive. We're obsessive when it comes to fresh seafood product. This looks for blemishes, it looks for parasites in product going through.
There is no federal inspection program for fish and seafood comparable to the one for meat and poultry. But the government has proposed new safety standards for the industry.
We want to make sure, we sell an awful lot of seafood in the course of a day. We want to make sure that our customers are getting the best product, period.
Chances are the fish that ends up in your supermarket has not been inspected or tested.
Okay, do you have any flounder or sole?
So how safe is it?
A pound of swordfish.
As we did with beef, we bought samples of fresh fish and seafood and had them tested. We found that our fresh fish was anything but fresh. In fact, by the industry's own standards, 30% was unfit to eat. Probably, experts say, because it wasn't kept cold enough for long enough. And listeria showed up in more than half our fish sample. If you plan to cook your fish thoroughly, that's okay. But if contaminated raw fish comes into contact with food you are not going to cook, you could get sick.
Yes, I need clams.
There was better news about the clams we tested. Most were okay, but 3 samples out of 20 were unfit to eat, and 2 contained listeria, a potential problem if the clams were eaten raw. And still to come.
Do you have free-range chickens?
What kind of chicken do you buy? We tested some of the best-selling brands. We'll tell you the results later on 48 Hours.
Deep in the hills of southern Kentucky, there's a chicken farmer who thinks he's got something to crow about.
Well, I'm David Wilson, and I'm in the chicken business, and we raise the finest chicken for culinary quality in the United States.
At Wilson Fields, They're trying to build a better bird.
The intent is to produce as clean a product as we possibly can, as humanely raised as we possibly can, and we're trying to produce a product that is as friendly to the environment as we possibly can.
And all this effort to produce a healthier, tastier chicken may also produce a chicken less likely to be contaminated with salmonella, the bacteria that poisons an estimated 800,000 to 4 million poultry eaters every year. One of the first things I guess one notices here at this particular coop is you have an open door policy.
We have a true range for the bird, ranging being access to pasture.
Free-range chickens. That's something that's pretty unique in this country.
The chicken by nature is a rather aggressive animal. If a bird in a chicken house doesn't have a convenient route to escape that problem, the stress builds up, and as you well know, stress can lead to health problems.
So are you basically saying that these birds are stress-free?
Well, probably there are no stress-free environments in the world, but the environment that the birds are in is as conducive for health as we can possibly make it.
Most other chickens are confined indoors and are given drugs to keep them healthy.
What we're trying to do is to keep a stress level down to a point where we don't need an antibiotic to maintain the process.
In many commercial flocks, salmonella can infect a bird through contaminated feed.
All of our feed products are tested at the mill for salmonella. We make every effort that we can reasonably afford to make to reduce the incidence of bacteria slash salmonella in our system.
I don't eat chicken anymore. I won't eat chicken. I won't allow it in my house.
Food safety advocate Rodney Leonard may not eat chicken.
It's tragic that a product that is as popular as poultry is in the United States is handled so badly that it becomes a major health risk if you consume it.
But he might try David Wilson's.
I would feel very comfortable in consuming that kind of poultry.
It's not just Wilson's growing methods that appeal to Leonard, it's the way the chickens are processed.
It's slaughtered in a process that you can feel very comfortable that it's not going to be, you're not going to be exposed to salmonella because of some sloppy processing.
A former supervisor of U.S. poultry inspection, Leonard knows all the places in commercial processing plants where fecal contamination, which spread salmonella, could occur.
It's the technology that traps the industry in producing a dirty product. When those birds move to the slaughter plants, they're hung by their feet, killed, and they go into a defeathering process, which is scalding. There's only a single scald. It's just enough to kind of loosen the follicles. That's one of the first places in a plant where you're going to run into cross-contamination. The next place you're going to run into problems is when the bird is degutted. That's done mechanically in practically all plants today. Unless you set those mechanical degutters correctly, you're going to break the intestines. When you break the intestines, you've got fecal matter in the body cavity, you've got fecal matter on the outside of the bird. Next point for cross-contamination is in cooling. In the United States, the cooling is done in chill tanks. They dump the birds in this tank.
And if contaminated birds end up in the water,
that's a fecal soup.
We go to great lengths in our processing to minimize cross-contamination.
David Wilson does things differently. His chickens go through a triple scalding process.
Birds go in the first tank, which is the dirtiest water, exit the first tank, go into a second tank, which is cleaner water, go into a third tank, which is filled with fresh water. And when they leave that, studies show that we can get up to a 10-fold reduction in bacteria that are carried out on the carcass of that bird.
They are degutted by hand and are air-chilled rather than water-chilled.
We're the only air chiller in the United States.
Now, by air chilling, what are the advantages?
The main one to me is to try to preserve the culinary quality. I don't want to dilute the flavor with the Columbia water system. I don't want to add water to that bird. I don't want to sell that water to you. You don't want to buy it.
And because no water is involved, no fecal soup. But all this special processing has a price.
Let's talk about the going rate for chicken per pound today. What's the average going rate?
59 to maybe 89 cents at the retail level. It costs the industry about 50 cents a pound to make a chicken.
What do you get for your birds?
Our birds are typically retailing for $1.29 to $1.79. If, in fact, you want a higher quality product, there's no free lunch. They are going to cost a little more.
But even if Wilson's chickens taste better, are they less likely to be contaminated with salmonella?
What do you think would happen if CBS News 48 Hours took one of your birds and had it tested? What do you think we'd find?
I think you'd probably find an extremely clean bird compared to the industry.
We did test Wilson's chickens and sampled several others in the industry. Next, the results.
David Wilson's chickens measured up to his claim. We tested 3 of his birds.
This is negative.
They were free of salmonella and the other bacteria that can make you sick. That's a lot better than the rest of our samples.
This chicken's kind of rotting.
We bought and tested 30 chickens.
Do you have a free range?
Other free-range chickens, as well as national brands like Perdue and Tyson.
That's okay. What kind of whole chickens do you carry then?
We also included no-brand chickens and kosher chickens. And this is what we found. 8 of the chickens had salmonella, 12 had listeria, and 21 had another kind of bacteria called Campylobacter that every year makes up to 4 million Americans sick. In fact, out of the 30 chickens we tested, only 5 got a clean bill of health. So which kind of chicken was best? The answer, none. Free-range, national brands, no brands, kosher, all proved as likely to carry bacteria. In our test, in the eyes of bacteria, all chicken was created equal. Experts also say some of the chickens we bought could be considered spoiled or on the verge of spoiling, and were probably mishandled and contaminated either at the packing plant or the store. But even that chicken can't make you sick if you cook it well enough and you handle it properly. Your hands, your cutting board, knives, dishes, all can spread bacteria if they come in contact with a tainted bird. So the experts say the secret isn't just in the cooking, it's also in the cleaning of anything that touches a chicken.
My chicken that I purchased, can I assume that it is free of deadly bacteria? Yes.
Consumer advocates and members of Congress want to change the way chicken is raised and processed. But the food industry has some ideas of its own. You are looking at Ground Zero, the industry's ultimate weapon in the battle against bacteria. Taking food and zapping it.
I don't think any person in the right mind would eat frog legs unless it'd been irradiated, because that's
right. Sam Whitney wants to irradiate your lunch.
This will be on sale Friday in Chicago.
Not only chicken,
this is orange juice,
but all food.
There's no threat of foodborne illness at all from anything but irradiated.
Sam Whitney runs Vindicator Foods outside Tampa, where they are about to irradiate some 2,000 pounds of chicken.
There's your cobalt.
That's cobalt 60 down there, the same stuff they use to kill cancerous tumors.
The cobalt comes up between these carriers.
And then the carriers, loaded with chicken, pass by the radioactive rack.
All your food scientists have been saying for years, you gotta radiate your food.
But radiation is a new approach here, and there are those who worry about the long-term effects.
Now, onions are being done all over the world.
Irradiated food is common in Europe and Asia.
Like France, Israel, Japan, they've been irradiating foods for 30 or 40 years.
And NASA won't leave home without it.
The astronauts, they've been enjoying this food for 20 years without any problems. We'll show you the food that we've done for NASA.
It's a little better when you heat it up and have some eggs with it for breakfast.
Bad food is costing us more than our health.
The federal government is spending $1 billion a year on food safety. In spite of that, it still comes down to you. Later this spring, the government plans to put labels on meat and poultry, offering its best advice: cook your food thoroughly. I'm Dan Rather, and that's 48 Hours. Coming up next, your late local news. Eye to Eye with Connie Chung will be here tomorrow. We're going to be away for a short time while you watch the Winter Olympics here on CBS. We'll be back 3 weeks from tonight. See you then.
There's a gaggle of fun straight ahead on tonight's Late Show with David Letterman. Dave's special guest, Dan Aykroyd, and a whole lot more coming up. Mark McEwen here. Thanks for making CBS America's most watched network. Now, get ready for your local news.
For a transcript of this program, send $5 to 48 Hours Transcripts, Box 7, Livingston, New Jersey, 07039. And to order a VHS cassette of tonight's broadcast, call 1-800-338-4847.